Welcome back to Just Politics. We are thrilled to be with you with a new episode this week. I'm Sister Eilish, and today I am thrilled to welcome back to the interview chair Joan Neal.
Hi, Eilish. It's really great to be back with you in the studio.
It's great to be with you too. I think, in the first episode of the season, you said you were taking a little break from Just Politics as an active interviewer, but we know that you're an active listener. And I think the interview that you have for us today is really, really interesting.
Well, I'm hoping that everybody listens to it and finds it interesting. It's something that I wanted to do for quite a long time.
And so, listeners, you might be wondering, who is this mysterious guest? And really, at Joan's urging this season, we did something that is really becoming less common in today's society in the United States. Joan had an honest political conversation with someone who honestly has different views about a lot of the policies that we talk about at Network.
That's right, Eilish. I had the opportunity to talk with Michael Steele, former chairperson of the Republican National Committee.
And what I think was most interesting about the conversation is really hearing how people's views are formed so often. We at Network we always talk about cultural influences and really how you navigated and engaged in that conversation. I think all of our listeners will be better for it. But as we start off, how did you and Michael Steele meet?
Well, it's interesting. We met actually at a tabletop exercise a year ago in June to kind of game out what it would look like if the 2024 election was won by the current president. It was an interesting exercise. Clearly, the political views of people around the table were shaping the way in which they participated in that exercise. And Michael was pretty strong in his reflection of his political views.
Well, that's really interesting. So, as you engaged with him in that initial conversation, what made you say, or why did you say, this is really someone who we want to have on the podcast? We know he was the former chair of the RNC. He's currently on MSNBC. He's very well known and brings a lot of differing opinions to the conversation.
Yeah, I thought it might be interesting to talk with him because it would give us an interesting window on how diverse, first of all, the Catholic world is on many levels, including on political issues. We are not a monolith as a faith community. There are divides even within the body of Christ. And of course, I also thought it'd be interesting for others to hear two Black Catholics talk about political differences. We don't often hear from Black Catholics on public issues. Members of the press, for instance, and pollsters think our numbers are too small to really get an understanding of our positions. And frankly, the Catholic Church has never been particularly interested in our viewpoints. So I thought this would be an opportunity to hear points of view that are not typically given much airtime.
I think you're exactly right on that, Joan. And I think without, further waiting, let's turn it over to the conversation and hear what you two talked about.
All right. Well, good morning, Michael Steele.
Good morning.
We are so delighted to have you on today's podcast. Michael is a Catholic, a Black Catholic, as am I, and former Augustinian seminarian, Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, and from 2009 to 2011, Chair of the Republican National Committee, and now an anchor on MSNBC. More recently, he has identified with the Never Trump movement, current and former Republicans and conservatives who oppose Donald Trump and advocate for the protection of democracy. Michael, welcome to Just Politics.
It's great to be with you, John. I hope you're doing well.
I am, thank you. And the same with you, especially during these really challenging times that we're living in. So, Michael, let's just dive right in. We always like to start off and get to know our guests a little at the start of our conversation. So I want to invite you to share a little something about yourself that doesn't get as much attention as your former role in the Republican Party or your new career as an MSNBC anchor?
Oh, wow, where to begin? Oh my gosh. Look, I am a I feel very blessed in what I've been able to do in my life. I've always been someone who's been open to the moment, so I've not really planned much of anything that I've done. The rooms I've been in, the people I've met, and I think a lot of that has just been since I was a kid being open to the world. My mom was a single mom at the time. I'm an adopted kid, which a lot of people don't know. So when I was in the heated throes of political debates on the questions of abortion, and people would go back and forth on that. I would always say, well, as an adopted child, I have a very different perspective on the idea of choice. And my mother chose life, and it's why I'm here. Because then my mother Maybelle chose me as a
Mm,
baby,
mm,
and so it's for me been that side of me. I think a lot of people don't really get to see too much how I form my thinking around various issues as someone who has been in both the religious space, the political space, and trying to navigate all of that. And so it's been an interesting journey. And of course, being an Augustinian seminarian is something a lot of people just didn't. They those who know me go, oh yeah, that happened. Yeah, actually, I was really.
yeah, actually, it's true, right?
That's true. It's true.
Yeah,
I was. And they're like,
yeah.
mm-hmm. And then I have to whip out the picture of me in my habit at 25 years old. And they go, oh my God. And the first thing they always say is, you had hair. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. You see that white
What?
religious garb there? Yeah, that's what I was showing you the picture for, not to
Yeah.
prove I had hair once. But
Well,
it's one of those, it's one of those journeys, Joan, that you realize and learn a lot about yourself, and how you live out your faith, and do the work that is in front of you.
yeah, yeah. Well, that is a very interesting, or those are very interesting things that I guess most of us would probably not know about you. And so I'm wondering, did your Catholic faith values lead you into politics? You were apparently a Democrat for quite a while. So,
No, I've never been a Democrat.
oh, is that? Oh, fake news on the
Oh yeah, a
internet.
lot of fake
Okay.
news.
All right.
And
Well,
that's,
thanks for
it
that.
raises an interesting thing, Joan, because because I've never understood this idea that if I say something, you immediately ascribe a political value to it.
Mm,
So if I say I love the flag, then oh, you must be a conservative.
mm,
And if I say that I want to care for the poor, oh, then you must be a raging liberal. I've never understood that the idea of being a conservative or liberal, a Democrat or Republican, is just largely a fake construct,
mm,
because it's ultimately, and what I've learned over the years is it's ultimately how you do the things you do, but what those things are anchored to. What is the thing that motivates you and engages you in a way that you act to, help families or to help a small business owner? Those aren't conservative or liberal in that sense. I mean, so when Jesus is standing on the mount and he is giving this truth, do you think people in the crowd were sitting there going, "Oh, well, he's certainly no liberal or no conservative"? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And so I read something during the campaign, the recent campaign, in which you had actual ministers of the gospel, and these were evangelical ministers who had decided that Jesus was too woke.
mm. Yes. Well.
If that doesn't tell you that we have messed ourselves up with stupid, I don't know what will. So that I went a little bit off on a tangent there to your point, but my where I grew up in Washington, D.C. I grew up in a Democratic household. My mom was a Roosevelt Democrat. When she remarried, my dad, John Turner, who's still alive at 93, will be 94 in the fall.
Oh, wow.
Still is and was then a Roosevelt Democrat. My mom raised me to be an independent thinker
Mm-hmm.
and not to be a Democrat because she was a Democrat or dad was a Democrat, but rather to go out and discover for myself who I was and where I aligned. And so that's what I did. And so I realized the Republican Party at that time in my journey was more consistent with what I thought about things, and certainly the home African Americans was in the Republican Party. That really spoke to me.
Initially. Mm-hmm.
Folks like Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, for example, really spoke to me. Those five first black elected officials in this country spoke to me. They were Republican. And the party's underpinnings around individual liberty, which is why they broke from the Whigs in the first place to fight for the individual liberties of every American, including slaves. That history all kind of resonated with me. Yeah, and there's still an ugly underbelly, there's no doubt for sure, because it's politics. But the underlying values of making sure you stand for the freedoms and the liberties that are guaranteed under our Constitution to everyone, that made sense to me.
I hear you. And, we are both Catholics. We're both Black and we're both Catholic. And so I'm really curious as Black Catholics, how our understanding, and I heard you very clearly talk about values and those values connected to your faith. I'm really curious about how our understanding of Catholicism and Catholic social teaching, for instance, led us to such a different understanding of the requirements of our shared faith. I think we are in our political leanings different, but I grew up with similar formation, from my parents. And yet today, I think you and I would say we are in different positions on public policies. How do you see the traditions of Catholic social teaching as compatible with and supportive of Republican values of limited government, for instance, prominence of capitalism and individual freedom, which you mentioned earlier, versus the common good? How do you square those two?
Well, the only way you have the common good is if you have a government that is not imposing itself on you.
Hmm.
The only way you really, live free is if you have the ability to access markets and to gain for yourself the resources to sustain your family, your community, your business. We will always have debates around the degrees to which or the lengths to which those things go or don't go.
Mm-hmm.
In my estimation, true republicanism cannot turn its back on the poor because they are always striving for something more, which is something we value. I don't know any person who's been poor in their life woke up every day saying, "All I want to be today is poor."
I'm pretty sure that that's true.
And so that means that they are, despite their circumstance and conditions, striving for something greater than where they are and what they're doing. And so, how do we then move the instruments of power, move the institutions of government to allow that to happen freely? And that's where we get into political differences on whether taxes should be high or low, whether business should be regulated or not, and more to the degree of what those regulations should be. So I've never gotten stuck on that. Where my roots are is in what I just said in terms of the value set of the proposition that as a public official, my responsibility is to make sure government does what it's supposed to do for you. If it's there to provide a safety net, then damn it, make sure the safety net is there. If it is there to allow for pathways for you to access opportunities freely without the restrictions that come from racism, xenophobia, and every other kind of ism, then that's what I have to make sure happens. And so this has always been sort of the quintessential debate, if you will, between the two political parties. But for someone like myself, I learned a long time ago from a man named Jimmy Carter, who did an interview in a very controversial magazine, in which he said something that was so profoundly important to me that I echo it every day in my service. And he said, in talking about his faith, he said, I cannot divorce my faith from my public service. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So if the social teaching of the Catholic Church tells me and teaches me to be mindful of the poor, to be mindful of those who are forgotten, to provide for the well-being of my neighbor, to love my neighbor, I have to manifest that in my public service.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of is where the rub is, because I think Catholic social teaching talks about the common good, talks about the economy working for people, not people working for the economy. And, history has shown us, I understand that you were inspired by Ronald Reagan and his economic plan for the country. And history has shown us that trickle-down economics just doesn't work to lift people out of poverty or to help them move up the economic ladder, especially people of color, because let's face it, capital rarely trickles down.
I just fundamentally disagree with that. I can't tell you the number of, how did we get a Prince George's County in the 1980s and the 1990s as the wealthiest black county in the country? It's because for the first time, a lot of folks were able to go and move into communities with 500, $700 million homes and buy them. And so that wealth creation, if you're talking about trickle down, such as it was called in absolute terms, it's a very different conversation in 2025 than it was in 1985. The economy was very different. The realities of the markets was very different. We were actually emerging out of a very troubling economic downturn, stagnation, inflation of the 1970s. I remember very well the gas lines. I remember the price of gas going from 50 cents to $1 and losing my mind when that happened. And Reagan, when he lost his 1976 campaign for the presidency, set forth a vision for the country that the country bought 4 years later in 1980. Now, there's some troubling aspects of how that campaign started, for sure. You don't go launch a campaign for the presidency in one of the worst places in the country, in Mississippi, where civil rights activists were killed, for sure. But that's the politics and the people around thinking that, I've got to appeal to certain folks to get this thing going, because Reagan was not someone who was well regarded within the Republican Party, which partly why he lost. A lot of Republicans were suspicious of Ronald Reagan because he was the, quote, former Democratic governor from California, even though he was a Republican. So you have all of these political pieces that can get in the way, but the reality of it is, that economy then is not necessarily work in the economy today. But I do take to heart your point, which is why who's in public office makes the difference on whether or not, when those philosophies are turned into public policy, that they actually do align and work.
Yes, and that's really necessary. And I think that is the point of Catholic social teaching. As a Catholic organization guided by the principles of Catholic social teaching, which focus on the common good, our new policy agenda is called An Economy for All, because we believe that linking the need for widespread economic security is important, is an important part of our Catholic faith. And I think you would agree that today we're experiencing less and less widespread economic security. In fact, the wealth gap is larger today than it has been in many years before.
Right.
And how we see that, and how the vision of Catholic social teaching sees that, is that the well-being of people depends a lot on the well-being of our entire system of government. So our agenda calls for just wages, affordable housing, quality health care for all, and an equitable tax system, among other policies. Would you agree that, given the outcomes of the 2024 election, that it's this vision of government that is necessary to help to level the playing field for people economically and to save our democracy?
It is. It is. And it should be part of the national conversation for sure. But that's not what the country voted for.
A small majority of the country voted for something different. It wasn't a mandate, a small majority.
Look, we live in a democratic society.
True.
We can parse the numbers and say it was only 1%. It wasn't a mandate. I agree with all of that. But 78 million Americans voted for it. Voted for where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I've said for quite some time, we are part of a generation of Americans who are the most selfish in history.
Mm.
And what matters to them is how all of this impacts them personally. It is not how it impacts my neighbors, my community, my family members, the rest of us, how we're all in this together. That's why the price of eggs has become such a symbol of that selfishness, that you are so hell-bent on, making sure the price of eggs is something that works for you, that you will vote for someone who will tear up everything else of value. Now, look, but that's what our democratic process is. And so the question becomes, and this is why the elevation of Pope Leo the 14th is so important, because now you will have an Augustinian pope rooted in this idea of service to a broader community, making the case for that Catholic social teaching, making the case for why caring for the poor, being mindful of the sick, certainly paying attention to the plight of workers is so important.
Yeah.
And so does that work to begin to change our attitudes in such a way that we then vote in the upcoming elections for people who stand for the very things that you just outlined?
Mm.
We'll see. But we are where we are because the American people have decided this is where they want to be. And we have who we have as public officials because that's who the American people decided they wanted. And until they decide otherwise, we have to continue making the case for those who are voiceless, I think.
I think we could have a difference of opinion about whether that was in fact the consensus of the majority of Americans. There were a lot of people who didn't vote, and so we don't know what their consensus, what their position is. But that's a point that we could argue probably until the cows come home.
Hear me out here. No, I'm not going to let you go on that. That is not a point to argue, because if you didn't vote, you've made a statement. Not voting is not neutral. Not voting, when 10 million Americans who voted in 2020 voted against the thing that was harming the country in 2020, don't vote in 2024. That is a political statement, as if they went to the ballot box. When you check out of the system, it's just like this. It's like saying this, Joan, because when I walk past the beggar and I give him $1, that says something. When I walk past the beggar and I don't give him $1, that says something too. So the same is true in our political system. When you participate, that says something. You have choices. I vote for you. I vote against that. When I don't participate, that says something too. I can tell you, as a former chairman, I spent a lot of time focusing on the people who didn't vote.
I'm sure.
Because I needed them to make a commitment other than the one they're prepared to make.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we'll call it a draw on that question, because there were, I'm sure, situations where people who may have wanted to vote could not for one reason or another. So let me just turn back to your position as a Republican. You're still a Republican, but you disclaim affiliation with this Republican Party, as I understand it. Correct me if that's wrong. But this party that has embraced Trumpism. What made you break with the party? And what are your thoughts on seeing so many Catholics as the traditional swing vote, providing such enthusiastic support for this administration and this agenda in 2016 and 2020 and 2024 and even today?
Well, let's start with the last part. I mean, clearly something is broken in that in the between the Catholic and the teachings of a church that does stand for social justice and all of that, and the political process. The infection of politics into matters of faith is profoundly disturbing. And I think that it has driven a lot of the underbelly of what we see playing out across the country, from the evangelical community to the Catholic community, to many communities of faith, being driven by political interests versus uh, the tradition, capital T, of their faith teachings. And that's something that I think, when you have pastors saying certain things from their pulpits or advocating for a certain type of politics, it reminds me so much of the Pharisees who used the trappings of the temple to justify their political activity and the role that they would play in pushing up against the teachings of Christ at that time. We still see that happening today. And so we have to be mindful that while it's true I can't divorce my faith from my public service or my public participation, I cannot allow that to consume my faith. In other words, Christ said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what belongs to God." But we're now living in an environment which we give to Caesar what is Caesar, but also give to Caesar what belongs to God. And so that piece we have to fix. For myself, look, Donald Trump is not a Republican. He's not a conservative, never has been. The man went political forum shopping when he was trying to figure out what party he should run in. He's on film saying that I would pick the Republican Party because they would be the easiest one to take over, essentially, and he was right for a whole host of reasons. And so I never subscribed to that. I've worked with the man in the past. I did not walk away from that experience with good good feeling or good thoughts about what I learned about him from that experience. And I tried to warn people in the party, you don't want to do this. This man is the P.T. Barnum of American politics. He knows there's a sucker born every minute, and he takes advantage of that.
Hmm.
And we've allowed ourselves to walk away from a whole host of underlying principles before you even get into policy. How we stand with our friends, how we regard the Constitution, the rule of law. We've discarded all of that in this version of the Republican Party, and I think that it will pay a dear price for it ultimately, as we've already begun to. So there's those two pieces for me. Have largely put me outside of the Republican Party. I don't lose sleep over that, because I stay in because of two reasons. One, it pisses them off. And two, I get to hold the mirror up to remind them of what they once were and why what they're doing now is so abject and so against the very things that they claim they stand for.
I want to ask you, beginning of this of your response, you talked a lot about co-opting our faith values. I wonder what you think about the rise of Christian nationalism in the country, especially in the Republican Party.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous as hell. I mean, we need to guard against it. Its roots are based in fascism. It certainly is not something that would manifest in a positive way for people of color, for immigrants. We're already seeing that. These Christo nationalists who want to turn the United States into some white Christian enclave. Do you really think we have a seat in that table or even will get into the room? No. Doesn't matter how, quote, Christian we are, we don't fit other criteria. We don't fit other beliefs necessarily. So I'm very wary of that and very concerned about it, as everyone should be.
Yeah.
Because that is an intermingling of government and religion in a way that the founders never wanted to happen. And if the founders wanted to establish a Christian nation, they would have done so. And they did not. So why are we now in the 21st century thinking we know better than the men who formed the very thing based off of their own lived experience of religion dominating government? Those Protestants and Catholics who fled England fled the tyranny of a king who imposed on them restrictions in the practice of their faith, restrictions in what they could outwardly express in terms of their beliefs. In addition to the financial burdens and the regulations of their life and their businesses. So why are we now thinking that, oh, well, this generation of Americans will do the thing that the founders never wanted to do because we'll do it better than they could have? That's crazy.
It is. But, this is a phenomenon that seems to have taken hold and is moving forward, especially in the agenda of this Trump Republican administration. So I want to ask you then, as you've begun your journey sort of away from the Trump Republicans toward a more bipartisan pro-democracy movement. Well, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I
No,
guess
I
maybe I should
wouldn't.
ask.
No,
Yeah,
it's not an exaggeration. No, I mean, I think that's a fair. I think that's a fair point. It's not a question of moving away from anything per se. Although, yeah, but I mean, that's not the driver. The driver for me is the last part that you said. When we stop believing in this country and the citizens, whether they are immigrants, migrants, or naturally born, when we stop believing in them and this crazy experiment we call America, then this idea of democracy, because democracy is an idea,
it is.
it's an idea that we try to put into practice every day. And when we give up on that, then you need voices and action to reorient the country's thinking, to say, okay, do you still value this proposition? All men and women are created equal, that we are endowed by God with inalienable rights, that we, the people, have been brought together in order to form a more perfect union. If you still believe in all of that, then saddle up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's moving in the right direction. And so, does that help for you to see the value of a government that works for all and supports the thriving of all people, especially if some of those people can't pull themselves up the economic ladder on their own? I mean, do you see a larger role for a functioning government and helping to level the playing field for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I was a government official. I was lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland. Of course, I know my job when I swore the oath of office was, okay, I now have to work for the people of this state, all 5 million plus at that time. And so when I sought to reform our small business enterprise, that was for all the small business owners, the women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, to make sure they had a level playing field if they're doing business in our state, so they can grow their market, but more importantly, they can grow their personal economies for their families, create what I called at the time legacy wealth. The Rockefellers could do it. Why couldn't Pookie? Right? And so that's very much an important part of it. It is recognizing how you make the instruments of government work for the people. And so I'll give you an example. I gave a talk at a center that adults would go to who would, are trying to get their GED. And there was a young woman who, after I gave a talk to this group of individuals, was stayed behind. She was very upset. She was crying. And so I walked up to her and she expressed to me that she had a problem. She got a notice the day before that she and her son were about to be evicted from their apartment. Why were they being evicted from their apartment? Because they were behind on their rent. Why were they behind on their rent? Because when she would come to this program that the state offered for her to improve her opportunity for her and her family, her current employer docked her pay for the time that she was not there. And so as a consequence, her paycheck every 2 weeks was short. And she couldn't make the rent and fell behind because she had to feed her son and do other things. And so she got the eviction notice. So I called our Secretary of Housing and I said to him, dude, you got to tell me that in this big expanse of government, we have some way to fix this problem. That this woman should not be penalized for trying to improve the life for herself and her son by losing her home. Guess what? We found a program that we could put her in. She stayed in the program, got her GED, and we supplemented the shortfall that she had each month. She got caught up on her rent, and she graduated the program, found a better job, and started moving along with the rest of her life for her and her son. That's why the safety net is there. That's what government should be there to do, to create that space. Because the business owner down the street, Joan, is not going to give her a loan, is not going to fix her problem.
But Michael, what you've just described, it hardly lines up with how we have experienced a Republican focus on limited government, personal freedom as opposed to common good, unfettered capitalism, and
personal freedom is part of the common good. What are you talking about? Stop it.
Well, individual freedom. Come on now.
Stop with the partisan talking points.
No, it's not. This is about the teaching of our faith.
We had a Republican administration in my state, and we governed as Republicans, and we served the people. Larry Hogan was the Republican governor in a Democratic state, and he served so well that they wanted him to stay for a third term. So the reality of it is how you serve, is how, look, I can take what I believe, my philosophy, and I can make it work in the institutions of government. Personal freedom, limited government doesn't mean that we stop caring for you.
Well, unfortunately, that has been the impact.
Go talk to Republican governors and see what they're doing on the ground in their states.
Okay, well, there is a chasm between what has been traditional conservative values and how they've been expressed in public policy, and from our perspective, the principles and the values of our faith and of our Catholic social teaching tradition.
So is your Catholic social teaching democratic? Is that Democrat? Is that Democrat? Is that democratic public policy?
If you mean that in a partisan political way,
Yeah.
the answer to that is no.
You sure?
It's universal.
You sure?
It's universal. I'm absolutely positively sure.
All
yes.
right.
And because of that, and considering this kind of the polarization that we see in our country right now, politically as well as across the spectrum of society,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I want to ask what advice you might have for groups like ours who want to find some common ground with those who don't perhaps share our commitment to the common good or to an economy that benefits all people.
Well, first, I think you have to stop presuming they don't share your commitment to the common good. So that would be number one. You actually have to have a conversation with them and ask them what they value and does that align with what you are trying to do.
Yeah.
So that's number one.
It's not an assumption, though. I mean, I think we have ample evidence.
Well, who have you talked to and they've given you ample that they've refused to work with you? What group have you talked to that's done that?
Well, I don't want to name names on air. So I will just say to you that we have encountered people who have different perspectives, and especially within our Catholic tradition, I'll say that as well. But my question is,
these are Catholics?
Yeah, my question
Okay.
is there common ground? How do we find that common ground? How do we bridge the extreme polarization in our country today? And then do you see a role for people like yourself who have moved away from this, current iteration of the Republican Party in helping to move the country forward, to save our democracy from its continual slide into fascism
Well,
and
look, I think on a number of points regarding that. One, I'll go back to what I just said. I think we have to grow ourselves beyond our current limitation. We have allowed our partisanship. Look, I can be partisan with the best of them when it comes to public policy, but I'm not going to be partisan when it comes to my country. All right, so that's a very important distinction because the country has to matter, right? We will have the beauty of the United States is that everything kind of settles in. We are all throwing in our experiences, our culture, our gifts, the talent, all that stuff comes into the pot. And we sort through that. So I think first for me, it's a matter of realizing what's the goal of this experiment? What is the goal of this country? And how do we now break ourselves away from the thing that's keeping us stuck in the political mud so that we can achieve those goals? Do we want to live out the gospels, right? Okay, let's do that. But realize not everyone believes in those gospels, right? Because they're not part of our faith tradition. They may not have any faith at all. So then that means our public servants have to be able to express those gospels in a way that materializes in the outcome. I give you the case of the young woman who was had just lost her home and was trying to figure out what to do. Making that turn, look, that conversation could have gone one of two ways. I could have said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," and walked away. But that was not my responsibility as a government official and as a Catholic Christian. That going back to, I in that moment did not divorce my faith from my public service. They worked together to help me find a solution for the problem this human being in front of me was having. That's what I think we need to do is recognize those moments where our faith and our service to each other is not in opposition or competition, but they are one.
in service of the common good. Yes.
Right. If we believe that, then let's act on that.
Yeah. Well, great. It seems like you are one of those people who I think can help to move that message throughout the
I'm
country.
trying,
And
Joan. I'm trying.
so so we'll look forward to having more conversations about that. I have one final question, Michael, for you, and it's a question that we ask of all of our guests. These are challenging and stressful times. So, what keeps you grounded in the struggle to save our democracy here in the United States? And how do you keep balance in your life? What gives you hope during these tumultuous, challenging times?
That's a very important question for me, and it's a hard one. I think what keeps me grounded is the hardest thing I do every day, and that is pray. That has always been a struggle for me in the sense that growing up as a young Catholic you have the formulaic prayers, the Our Father, Our Mary, etc. And you know those, you say those, it's rote, you do it. But I think what I find now is in the work that I do and in the culture and society in which I live, prayer becomes that much more important. And for me, what I find is it's not praying at a certain time of day. It's praying pretty much every minute of the day. And a moment where you have a conversation and it's done, and you said, "Thank you, Lord, for that," and you move on. Or you're about to go into a conversation and go, "Lord, I'm going I'm gonna need you to hold my hand on this one because
Yeah.
I'm about to slap somebody," you know? So
Yeah.
it's that is for me the hope is prayer. And I just want to hope people appreciate that. I think what Christ taught us, yes, he gave us the Our Father, And that was a full expression of how we can speak to God. But you also look at all the other examples throughout his ministry that Christ gave us as moments of prayer, forms of prayer, the Beatitudes, the lesson of of the woman by the well. All of these things, the parables he told us are prayerful examples that we should invite into our lives and that we then pray back out onto others. And so for me, that's where my hope is. That's how I get through each day, that and a little gin and tonic. And
Won't hold that against you.
and,
That's for sure.
and we make it to the
Yeah.
next day.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michael Steele, for joining us today, giving us an opportunity to have a really engaging conversation. It's been enlightening, and I hope that you will come back
Well,
again.
I will, Joan. I love talking with you, and
All right.
I really appreciate it. The conversation and the back and forth, and I think we need more of that. I think we need to be honest about that with each other, and I think it'll help us all kind of grow. Because at the core, regardless of where you and I stand politically, we know what our responsibilities are in our faith expression as well as our public service expression. So,
Amen to that. And so you and our audience can find Michael each evening on MSNBC and on his podcast on Spotify. Thanks, Michael.
thank you.
So, I think Michael Steele represents the kind of diversity that we have in the Catholic Church on a couple of levels. In contrast to our, that is, network's interpretation of the Church's Catholic social teaching, he, like many other Catholics, does not see the harms that historic Republican policy positions have inflicted on the most vulnerable populations in our country. Historically speaking, by and large, the focus on the primacy of the free market has not lifted people out of poverty, has not provided a ladder up for the majority of people, not just Black people, but people in general in this country, to be able to take advantage of the opportunities of our democracy. Sure, some people are as fortunate as Michael and myself, and we have had opportunities or more opportunities than many others to make a good life for ourselves and our families. But so many others living in urban and rural pockets of poverty have simply not had the chance to overcome some of the structural barriers in our country, many created by public policies and undergirded by free market thinking. So the market is not impartial. In fact, history shows us that it is highly skewed toward those who have wealth from investments rather than income from work.
I think listening to you say that, Joan, and your reasoning for interviewing him, what I couldn't help but think about is the racial wealth and income gap. And kind of around the same time that you were interviewing Michael Steele, I was also presenting the racial wealth and income gap, which listeners can find on our website, to a group from Pax Christi in Canton, Ohio. And Canton is an old steel mill, old factory town, deeply divided along racial lines, deeply divided around wealth and income lines. But as you were talking about that, I feel like what you said about your reasoning is like the exact piece of what we see in the racial wealth and income gap is that it's these systemic policies.
That's right.
That it is so hard for anyone to break out of the systemic injustices that are just continually heaped on and on and on and on. And what someone, when doing the program with them, said is, this is why we have to learn about these pieces and why we have to have honest conversations, even if we differ in how we understand the impact or implications of the policies. And I think that's really what comes to light in the conversation that you're having too.
Well, I hope so, because that was really a major goal.
And so I guess when you're thinking about that, Joan, what was it like to have that conversation with Michael Steele? I heard, I'll say, some very differing viewpoints on the same thing of saying, like, I do not see this the same way you do.
Yeah.
But what was it like to talk with someone about it at that level?
Well, it was challenging. I will certainly say that. But didn't go into the conversation expecting that there would be some kind of metamorphosis, that he would come over to our side of thinking. So, uh, I enjoy a spirited discussion. And from what I knew of him, I thought he would not disappoint on that end. And indeed, he didn't. He didn't shy away from sparring back and forth. And I think at the end of the day, we both enjoyed the exchange.
But, what did you, as the interviewer or as a fellow Catholic, as the interim director of network, what did you get out of the conversation? But I'm also thinking, what do you hope for our listeners to get out of the conversation too?
I found the talk enlightening. And while it didn't exactly explain how two people with somewhat similar backgrounds could land on two different pages with regard to both our political views and our Catholic social teaching, it did reveal that we can have a constructive dialogue with people with whom we disagree, especially politically. And I hope that it serves as a model for others out there who are genuinely wanting to understand our differences and to try to find some common ground on which we can build a shared sense of solidarity. At Catholic Relief Services, when I was there, we used to say, solidarity will transform the world. And I believe that with my whole heart and soul. I hope more people can have these kinds of conversations and begin to understand that we have more in common with each other than we have differences.
And, I think too, that's why it is so important for us to start at a value level often. I was just talking with a group of high school students who asked, why is it important to meet with members of Congress speaking from a faith-based language?
Good question.
And I think it was an excellent question. And they said, especially when they don't agree with you. And I said, it's less sometimes about the faith piece, like naming Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or Jewish, but it's the values that those faiths hold in common, even if we're at different places, that we can have a good starting ground for those conversations.
Yes, I think that is so important. And it may be the only way we get out of this extreme polarization.
And to that end, Joan, I'm wondering, how did your conversation with Michael Steele influence your perception, maybe of our current political moment, or what we need to be doing?
Well, we all know that our country is suffering from the most polarization we have ever experienced. And it is toxic. And we will never move forward on our vision of establishing a more perfect union until we can move past this extreme division. And as humankind, in direct proportion to our ability to see each other as equal human beings, all created in the image and likeness of our loving God, that is the way that we rise. And so conversations like my talk with Michael Steele gave me hope and give me hope that we can overcome our differences, defeat the powers that want to dominate us and divide us, and find common ground that will secure our democracy for the future. I mean, I came away from our conversation feeling a sense of hope and maybe even a bit of expectation. If we can move a little closer, we can make it happen.
I think I'm going to have to go back and again listen to the interview with Michael Steele. And I really encourage everyone to listen to it maybe a couple times, because I think there are really good pointers for people about how to engage in the conversation, even just how the two of you responded to each other.
Yes, I think that's right. I hope that it is a model that people will be able to resonate with and replicate with their own acquaintances, maybe even members of their own families.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joan. It's been great to have you back on this episode of the podcast, back on in the interview chair of Just Politics, and we can't wait to have you on again.
Thanks, Eilish. It's been wonderful to be back.